Kate Rosenbluth is with us. Kate also has a PhD from the UC Berkeley, UCSF Joint Program in Bioengineering. She was a postdoctoral fellow in translational neuroscience at UCSF before coming to do the Stanford Biodesign Innovation Fellowship with us. Kate also founded a company out of the fellowship, Cala Health, where she is now a board director and chief scientific officer, and she's going to tell us more about Cala today. She's also a lecturer with the School of Medicine and leads clinical informatics and digital health, some programs for us, including, of course, in the new Masters of Clinical Informatics program. So, Kate, we are delighted to have you here. And you guys are troopers for 3 back-to-back speakers, but you are not going to want to miss what Kate is going to share. So I will hand it over to Kate.
Perfect. Well, really looking forward to this. Nice to see some familiar faces. And yeah, please, we all have long days on Zoom. So seriously, even while I'm in the middle of this, if you want to, jump up, stretch, do any of that, please go for it. No problem at all. And that was a perfect question, lead in on that last question to a number of the topics that I am going to cover today. And basically how I'm going to sort of structure our next, actually, Lynn, just to check, do we have up until 5:50?
Yeah.
On this section? Okay, perfect. Perfect. I'll aim to leave some good time for Q&A in that too. What I'm basically going to walk through is going to be sort of 3 sections. I'm going to be mostly focusing today on the value of a need. I'll give you some really concrete examples. Let me just pull this up on how to estimate value of a need. Then I'm going to do a section of walking through just different methods for doing that need valuation. And then because the question came up around reimbursement, I couldn't help myself pulling in a little bit of reimbursement content. I just popped that in. And specifically what I'm going to go through is reimbursement is a very big and sort of nebulous, often daunting topic. I think you will cover it in much more detail when you get to the concept phase of this. But there are a few key areas of reimbursement that are pretty easy to jump into and can actually be great tools for assessing your market, specifically for testing your pricing assumption. So I'm going to go just through a couple examples on those, and then we'll wrap up with some examples from Cala. And feel free to jump in anytime. Just raise your hand or chat, and anyone feel free to just shout out if I'm not noticing that is happening. All right. So this is the day that we shipped our first product at Cala. You can see, let's see, I'm right here, tucked in there. And I like starting here because when you think about entrepreneurship, why are we going to go down this journey together of valuing a need? One of my favorite entrepreneurship definitions is this: entrepreneurs achieve transformational impact in the face of limited resources and limitless uncertainty. So really that is what valuing the need is all about. It's that limited resources, to triple underline that one. You have limited resources. How do you figure out sort of where to spend what I think of as your most valuable asset? Your time, your passion, your energy. And that's why needs valuation and screening is so important. I love Stacy and Sing Sing, fearless, terrific med tech leader. She's the chairwoman of our board of directors here at Cala. And I love how she says this, which is that, you want to identify the vital few within the useful many. So as you look at needs, for example, there are many good needs, there are few really great needs. And so being very disciplined about this and sort of rinsing and repeating this process is so key to focusing your time. Okay, so beyond the philosophy, let me first just introduce you to Cala Trio and to our product. Oh, it looks like that is actually not going to play in here, so I'm just going to share it over in a different window. So just a really quick, I want to just give you a brief background on our work at Cala, because I think this will make a lot more sense when we dig into some of these examples. So our first product to market is a wrist-worn therapy for a condition called essential tremor. You can see what that looks like here. It's a shaking of the hand. Patients use the device in 40-minute sessions. They turn on stimulation, and the It's a calibrated, individualized stimulation. It sends a signal to an area in the brain called the ventral intermediate nucleus of the thalamus. This is the same location where deep brain stimulation is surgically implanted. Happy to, I'd say just very high level sort of our business model. We receive prescriptions from physicians directly for the product. We drop ship product to patients' doorsteps. We didn't know when we first launched that the pandemic was right around the corner and that this would really allow us to continue, building and serving these patients. But it has, yeah, this is our first product to market, and we've got much more coming. So let me do this. I'm going to go back over to my PowerPoint. Okay, so as I'm walking through this, we're going to go into need statements and valuation. I wanted to show you basically the end of the journey, which is this. And now we'll go all the way back to the very beginning of the journey. I'm calling this slide value, value, value. And that's a couple questions here came up around, fundraising, around market sizing. So I thought this might even just sort of be some helpful context. If you look at Cala is about 7 years old now. We've raised 4 rounds of capital. One of the things I kind of wanted to emphasize here is that tools for value are not only so important for screening, they're incredibly important when it comes to, I would say to pitching, whether you're pitching, quite frankly, to an investor or you're pitching, to people, to convincing, your early team and partners to join you on this challenging journey. One of the things I wanted to emphasize here is really when I even look back at our raises of the company, you can really time them up along I'd say initially our Series A was really all about the value of the need. It was about, details at this point, technology wise, we were only in the world of benchtop stimulators. We hadn't built any product yet. It was all about the value, understanding of the opportunity that we were meeting. In our next raise, it was much more on the value of the solution. There was a very early generation. The Series C was more on the value of a product. And then we've just recently closed a Series D, which is really, I'd say, sort of on the value of the business and that commercial model. Okay. So from there, unless there's any burning questions, I'm going to jump into need valuation. Okay. I don't hear anything. Okay, great. So here's your basic, structure of a need statement. This was our, need statement from Biodesign. A way to reduce hand tremors in essential tremor patients contraindicated for surgery or unresponsive to drugs in order to restore their ability to eat, drink, and write. So you can see here we have, a nice structure. What's the need? What is the population? What is the desired outcome? So how do we assess the value of this need? I'm going to start with sort of valuing needs 101. If you only take away one thing from today, this is it. It's pretty simple. Your value of your need is simply the number of people who have that need times the dollars per person to meet that need. So here's an example of how you would use this for need screening. And what I'm going to do in the next sections is you might be sort of looking at these numbers saying, well, where did you get these numbers from? And that's what I'm going to walk through next is how do you pressure test your assumptions around sort of number of people, or how do you pressure test your assumptions around value per person? So here you can see this is the need statement we just talked through. A need statement that we were screening this against, that we were comparing this against was, and I picked one from a related field. In this case, it's from another movement disorder called Parkinson's disease. And this need was a way to improve placement and tuning in Parkinson's patients with deep brain stimulators. It's a surgical implant to alleviate the burden of repeat surgeries and tuning. And just sort of as a simple example of this, first pass, our numbers here where there's about 2 million people who we think are have this need. Let's say value per person, rough finger to the wind, this is maybe $1,000. Estimated value then of this need would be 2 billion. If you look at the DBS need here, we had said, well, maybe there's about 20,000 people who would need this. The value is much higher, 30,000. So this is roughly a $600 million value. Any questions on that? Because this is pretty fundamental.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
How was value per person estimated?
Great question. Let me keep going. Okay.
Cool.
So I'd say first pass. I mean, well, I don't want to be too first pass. You could be in an airport with a napkin doing this, right? I run these all the time, and I would say first pass is literally it is your guess, right? It is being pretty naive to this. You just start and you put something down, and then everything else we're going to talk through is the different ways to come up with that number, sort of, and to pressure test it. So I'm going to give you lots of methods for it. But I think that to me, that's a really sort of key aspect of all of this work, is really how much time you put into it is how refined it gets. But sometimes, you've just also got to give yourself the mental sort of space and freedom to just, make what I would like to refer to as swags, which, if you haven't heard that expression, it stands for a scientific wild ass guess. So at first you're just swagging. So let me get and I'll come back to your question in just one moment. Let me give you an example first on a tip for valuing the number of people side of this. And then most of the time we're going to spend on the value on estimating the value per person. Okay. So one of my favorite tools for checking that you have the right rough number of people is, and this has come up in a couple of the questions and comments today already, is I love matching a top-down analysis and a bottom-up analysis. So basically what you can see here, a top-down analysis, this is where in this case, we're starting from the overall prevalence. So 6 to 10 million people have this condition called essential tremor. It makes it difficult for them to eat with a spoon, write, et cetera. So when you dig into some of the literature, it seems like there's about 4 million of them who are actively seeking treatment, a smaller number of that are diagnosed. And basically that comes down to about 1.7 million people in the US who are sort of medicated, diagnosed, seen in the healthcare system. That is a top-down analysis. When you know that you really understand your market is when you can match the bottom-up analysis. So top-down analysis will initially come out with numbers often that are much too large. So what we did here was built a simple bottom-up analysis, starting with, well, how many primary care providers are there? How many patients do they see per month? Roughly how many neurologists are there? How many do they see per month? How many movement disorder neurologists, are there? What do they see per month? And the goal here is more, I'd say, order of magnitude being correct than really exact numbers. You can see though here that once these converge, we were pretty comfortable with this idea of, let's say that there's about 2 million of these people. There's 2 million people who fit our needs statement, and maybe sort of roughly half of them are seeing specialists. So really nice sort of quick tool to use is to match a bottom-up and top-down analysis and use that to pressure test this number, the number of people in your needs statement. So now we're going to talk a little bit about pricing, and I'm going to take this from a few different directions. One piece I just sort of wanted to pause on before we jump into this, this already came up today in one of the questions, is I think of there as being a maximum price, a maximum value, and a minimum. And basically, if you have a needs statement, one could be your value of your needs of meeting your needs statement 100%. So that's your actual maximum value. So to go back to our needs statement, for example, this would be if we 100% reduced hand tremor is gone in this population. And so therefore their ability to do this is 100% restored. So that would be your maximum pricing. And if you think when we get to concepts and solutions, you can basically say for your solution, how much of that maximum does it fit? And that's going to be sort of roughly your pricing from a value-based lens. The other piece I want to highlight is sort of the bottom, is what is your minimum price? And I like to think of your minimum price as the value of your solution that meets your needs criteria. So you have to meet your needs criteria in order for a solution to kind of make it through this process. So what you can do is you can look at your needs criteria, which in this case, let's say for essential tremor, we might say, well, based on how our needs structure is stated, maybe it doesn't even need to be better than drugs because we've scoped our needs to be people who are not responsive to drugs. So maybe we're saying that, a 20% efficacy is good enough, right? That's not 100% addressing the need. And so I often use this as a tool just to kind of sanity check my pricing, which is I try and estimate the lowest pricing and the highest pricing. And practically then, I want my pricing I'm putting into my model, into my need screen to be something in the middle. Okay, just acknowledging there are sort of those two highs and lows. I'm going to skip over that one and come back. This is a question, the question that was just raised on how do you actually do the pricing, as well as someone asked earlier about reimbursement. And so what I wanted to do here was sort of highlight again, just to simplify this down, what are the two different, you have limited time and you're looking at a bunch of different needs. So you need to be pretty fast on this. What are the two different places I would sort of pay attention on pricing? What I would suggest is you think of the value if it is paid by the key user, as well as, or the key stakeholder, as well as the value if you were reimbursed for solving this need. So on the left, this one, if you were, paid by this key stakeholder, for example, if your key user is a patient, this would be the price that a patient would pay. Sometimes, the need that you might be solving might not explicitly be a need of the patient. It might be more a need of the hospital. So in that case, it would be the price that the hospital would pay. So this is sort of, this is the cash pay world. And then the other one I would think about is if I solve my need with a solution that was to be reimbursed, what would a payer likely pay for this? And those are sort of usually the two upfront. You haven't invented your concept, so you don't even know if it's appropriate for more, I'd say, sort of cash pay or reimbursement. But you can at least kind of ask that question up front of healthcare. Healthcare is one of the only industries where the person who recommends a therapy, who pays for the therapy, and who uses the therapy are different stakeholders. So that is a very fractured payment cycle. I think it's one of the things that leads to a lot of inefficiency in healthcare. But because of that fracturing, you kind of need to break it apart and say, sometimes it will be different what a payer would pay for something and what the value is to the user themselves. So I usually just take, just like doing that max high-low pricing, just look at these two. Okay.
Kate, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Are you coming up with your swags based on essentially what's going on in the competitive landscape?
Yep, exactly. That's totally where we're going to go. So basically, if you look at, and actually, let me do that. Let me do this, and I'm going to come back on show you this, and then I'll come back because this will make more sense. Okay. So basically, I'm going to give you some examples from Cala, and then we'll walk through a little bit of that reimbursement side as well. Is when you look at Cala, how did we value this need? How do we come up early sort of with that roughly $2,000, let's say, level that I showed you? So the first thing to do is to look at your competitive landscape. And I'm going to come back on, so basically you can look at, this is the competitive landscape for essential tremor. So that slide where we were saying you could go basically a cash-based pricing or a reimbursed pricing. This is the scope of therapies of therapies and interventions that ET patients had at their hands, at the time when we were starting Cala. So then what we did is basically looked at these and said, well, which of these are cash pay? And in those cases, what are the patients paying? As well as which of these are reimbursed and where are they reimbursed? And that gives you a really nice sort of scoping range. You don't know what your solution is. You don't know if you're competitive, what you're competitive to yet, but that can give you just sort of a very solid grounding in your pricing assumptions. To go a little bit more detailed, and I am pulling sort of some later stage content that you would not be expected to have at this point, is what you're eventually going to do is really look at pricing, and you're going to look at, for example, pricing of your surgical options versus your intervention, for example. And you will, this is how eventually you'll get to product pricing, but this is spot on what you want to do sort of early on. The other place I'd really encourage you to look is at guidelines. So oftentimes, just look at the need, the patient population that are in your need statement, go and find the guidelines, and they will have very nice sort of walkthroughs of what are the recommended. What's really helpful about this is it helps you quickly sort of scope in what are the first and second line therapies, interventions, surgeries, et cetera, for this patient population. And then it just really narrows down. You can start your pricing work with only looking at the cost, of particularly sort of, I'd say, what is first line to start that journey. So guidelines are incredibly helpful. My favorite place to go for that is that either you can go to the societies, but even a really great place to start is a resource called Up to Date, which you all have access to via Stanford. And if you go on to Up to Date, you can look up, any disease area and find relatively recent sort of updated information on how those patients are recommendations for treatment. The last piece that I was just pulling here is just a poster from a great place also to get a lot of this type of work. There's a conference called ISPOR, which is a health economics outcomes research conference. And, you know, we were able to even sort of pull very early on, a lot of health economics outcome research is not solution specific. It's just actually about the costs of these patient populations. So I just say, you know, if you're really lucky, you'll also find something like a poster, an abstract, or a manuscript that actually just walks through the health economics of your patient population. And that's a very good justification for pricing as well. Great. Okay, so I'm going to take just a couple minutes here. I want to look back at one section here, which was because of the question around reimbursement. And I think this is a very helpful, I just say guide, just pulled this in from somewhere else. Okay, is that when you look at reimbursement, what I would really encourage you to do is prioritize your time by focusing on specifically on your need statement population and problem. And I'm a big believer that some level of reimbursement research sort of should be done right up front. And the reason for that is that reimbursement is often the white hot risk for a lot of med tech companies. It is a very challenging area, and it is totally, it's a great also, not only is it a risk, it's a gift for valuing your needs, because you can go and look up reimbursement information, and that is very justifiable, sort of validated numbers for really understanding that opportunity. So what I put together here, this is just a very brief summary of these are the phases of reimbursement. You have to figure out who your payer is, what your benefit category is, what your coding is, what your pricing is, and what your coverage is. So what I'm going to do is just look at a couple of these, and these are really the key questions that I think you should be asking early on at the valuation stage. So I just pulled in and you know, I'm happy to share these slides if anyone wants to read through all these in detail. But this is the type of information that during your needs phase, you can really pull out on reimbursement. What payer is relevant to our population? You know, what are current solutions priced at? Are they covered? What outcomes do I need? This is really key to both your market assessment, to your needs evaluation, as well as to your needs criteria. And during the concept phase, you will refine all of those, but it's really helpful, sort of whatever you can pull up front. So the key areas that I would focus in on are this one. Number one, which payer covers most of your population? So this is, you know, a map of the payer landscape in the US. Just a couple sort of quick examples on this. If you are working on a need that was related to Alzheimer's disease, your key stakeholder is likely Medicare, because Medicare is the federal program that provides insurance to Americans who are over 65 years of age. So now you've just way scoped down where you need to look for any comparable data. You need to look at Medicare, right? So I think that this is sort of some of the, again, just sort of quick pass. Sometimes asking these questions can give you just a lot of just kind of scoping down to where you need to look for that pricing comparable data. Next one here. This is about benefit category. I think the main thing here is that if you don't fit in a benefit category, it can be really difficult to get reimbursed, and you might end up having to look at other models. So when we were just talking about pricing, you know, if you're working on a need statement where it's very sort of unlikely that it'll fit either under like a hospital or a medical coverage or prescription drug benefit. Obviously, you haven't invented your solution, so you don't know yet. But this kind of gives you a look and feel of the types of needs that, you know, would fall under reimbursement. And if you are looking at needs that are outside of that, like sort of, for example, some of the more, you know, consumer wellness, then you probably are looking at cash pay models. And then, you know, here, this is just some guidance on, you know, coding. For example, you're looking at procedural codes or at device codes. And really what I wanted to sort of emphasize is this piece here, which is that if coding exists in the field that you are looking, then, so for example, when we were looking at that, the example of the DBS, you know, if we're looking at a innovation that is related to DBS, right? DBS payment already exists. This now becomes much easier for me to do a really detailed benchmark of my pricing, because I can build in an existing area where I can literally just look up payments on different codes. And those are all publicly accessible. You know, I think that it's, and sometimes, you know, you'll be able to pull that. So these are really the first places that I go for pricing, is that trying to guess, you know, what people would pay out of pocket, going back to this example, what people would pay out of pocket for related, for competitive landscape, for competitive technologies, and then looking over on the, what can I, you know, just quickly extract about reimbursement, again, for competitive technologies.